have a great panel that we put together for you. And leading it off, Linda Ricci, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and open up the panel?
Thank you very much, Kent. Yes, we have an amazing panel. We have some of my favorite people here today to talk about amazingly interesting creative stuff. I'm Linda Ricci. If you guys don't know me, I am an artist in VR and 3D. I'm still learning. I love it. I also do a lot of consulting to companies around emerging technologies, but that's the boring business part of me. The creative part of me loves this stuff, and that's why I'm here today to talk. My guests today we have Cause, who has done some amazing work in All Space VR with Christy. They are a team, and they do world building. And if you haven't seen Baba Yaga and some of the others, that's one of my favorites. You really should check it out. Will is immersivist. He's a freelance creative technologist and immersive designer, and he does amazing work as well. And he does some pretty cutting edge stuff. So we're going to get to that. And then, of course, there is Karam, who is the big guy who does VRTO, and he does 5 hours. And I don't know how Karam ever sleeps because he does so many things. But I'd like to have them all introduce themselves a little bit and tell me about what you're doing and about your route to how did you get here. Cause, go first.
Oh, man, I knew it.
Yeah.
Hello, my name's Austin Caine. I go by Cause in the VR space. And about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, perhaps, Christy, who is my partner and was already in the space for educational purposes, she got me in there just to kind of play around. And I just really took to it. And I've always been a creative. I've always been a creator and wanting to make things. And I started learning Unity because we were all locked down with the pandemic. So they were giving courses away, and it just fell into place. I just started building, and I got to go into alt space and explore the things I was building in real time. And it was just such an interesting aspect to be able to do that. And it just snowballed. Listen, long story short, I love what I do. I think I'm good at it, and I guess other people do too. So.
Indeed. Will, go ahead.
All right, I'll try my best here. I went to film school like 6 or 7 years ago. I think that's the amount of time I have it right. I don't know. That's when I graduated. I've been doing, I left that area and thought, I don't really like film that much. I like the new thing, the things that immersed. Yeah, things that immerse and push you into places, and started working installations. And then installations moved over to 360 VR, where I'm like, that's a cool start. And then went to real time and started getting more into Unity and Unreal and working with a bunch of companies all around Los Angeles. That took me all around the world, really trying to capture people and places and bring people to those people and places. And since then, it's been a massive dash to try and make that as accessible as possible. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing recently has been kind of like on this really fringe AR, VR, edge compute place that I hit it as a creative technologist, where I come at it with creative directors to come up with stories, and with a technical background to know how it works. And so all those things come together to push all these boundaries even further. And so that's what I do day, night, and when I'm even sleeping.
Awesome. Karam, I don't know if you can summarize what you do because you do so much, but give it a try.
Well, in the context of this panel, I just want to say that the good advice is to always surround yourself with the smartest people in the room and be the dumbest person in the room. And that's how I feel today, because everybody here is just mind-blowingly amazing. And I know so many of these people as like leaders. So where I come from is I had to take my events online a year and a half ago. By no means was at the beginning of my experience with modding and level design and everything, but I had to figure it out in WebXR context and see like, where's WebXR now? And rather than use an existing platform, I decided to go back to the Janus folk. James Baikianu had ported Janus VR into a WebXR version of it, Janus Web, and we decided to extend the open source code base. And basically from that point on, I've been just sort of branching off 5Rs as its own thing that can play 4K stereoscopic spherical videos in real time with no buffering, but then also the environments themselves have to be like a salad bowl that you can eat. So I've been using just raw code, and I guess it's a form of 3JS and JavaScript and Janus legacy code that I cobbled together. I place everything by taking the positional data of a user out of the console, and then I made a little widget that'll convert that into just 3 numbers. And it's very, very like the Matrix, where you're just using math to build a world.
Right.
But the best part is you can just update everything in real time and watch what people are doing and be like, I'm going to change that now. So that's part of it. But optimizing for that has been the joy. I come from like a cinematic background as a cinematographer. I try to get away from the super flat, low poly look that you can get into a lot with WebXR and make things look really visceral and moody. And so I'll stop there, but that's where I come from at this.
Awesome. Well, this is great. All right, guys, we don't have a whole lot of time. I know we can probably talk about this for like another week. So I'm just going to dive into it. The title is such as Polygons are the new expensive. And I love that because it is true. I am the Polygon queen when it comes to inventing stuff that I then have to remesh and make smaller and all that. And it's really hard to do. But what I'd like to know is when you approach a project, you have to plan in advance, particularly if it's for XR and even more so for WebXR, right? So talk to me about the planning stages you go to and what are the traditional pipelines that you might bring in with you and how do you have to change what you consider when you're moving to a WebXR environment? So by the way, discussion, not a panel. I'm not going to call on each one of you separately. Please just go ahead and talk. So anybody want to jump in on that one?
Let me start because their stuff is cooler. So my thing is like I will start to like zhuzh in Blender some basic shapes, and I start to think about what will the UX be for a user going through a space. What's the first thing that they'll witness? What's the second thing that they'll witness? How long is the time before I have to do the enemy at the gates where the train doors open and you see like Stalingrad, like holy shit. So it's this sort of like start with the drop and expand into the ocean, and
Right.
I'll start figuring out how can I make this effect with the lowest possible number of tries in the space. And then what's the least number of lights that I can use to maximum effect? And as people have said before, making things emissive, which to anybody who's just learning about this, emissive in Blender to WebXR does not mean you're going to get this beautiful neon glow with this like bloomy fall off. It just means that things aren't affected by lights when you turn them off. They're just, that's
Right.
still that solid color.
Right.
But you can use them to create mood effects and then sort of get a kick off of it if you do things correctly. So I use those components to map out the simple to the complex experience and allow things to kind of like build in over time. And then also think about render order, like what should be on top of what. Like for example, I have these little kelp fronds that are just 2D PNGs that are billboarding, which means it's turning towards you no matter what angle you look at it from. But they're rendering first. So before you see all my signs about how to move through the space and stuff, you see all these kelp fronds. And it kind of gives up the secret of like, ooh, there's like a whole glade over there. So you also want to think like, what order will things load in, let alone that you want people to know that they're there. And there's this entire like parallel sequence of the experiential version of how to best load things in versus the actual practical logistical one.
Right. That sounds really complicated. Will, I know you had some thoughts on this. You pinged me beforehand about it.
No, actually, I'm in full agreement about this. It's a lot of people don't talk about the order. They usually just go, just make things different styles, billboard everything you can,
Right.
And establish layering of systems so that you know there's culling, and I won't get into culling. That's someone else here could definitely explain that better than me. But you can establish what you know the person's going to see and do, and what they are not going to see and do, and be able to cut off things that definitely will not make the cut. No one has to worry about what's behind a wall, in a sense. So you can really play with that type of advantage of viewpoint. More on my side, coming from like, so where I am right now as a freelancer at PsyOp is like one of the world's best animation studios that does things like Pixar level. That doesn't translate to WebXR. It really, really doesn't. It's an entirely different animation system. And a lot of that is really talking to these wonderful artists, these brilliant, brilliant artists who make really, really high-end content, and being able to take it down to, say, like a vertex animation, trying to run in different styles of animation and to a system that can accept it if you prepare it, if you talk about it ahead of time, know what your limits are. It does actually come down to polygons, but it usually means having to change a format style.
How do you reduce polygons then? What is the polygon approach?
I actually had one of my developers go through Houdini and actually do an entire changeover from through Houdini to change it to a proper style that would work. Right. It requires a lot of R&D and testing because the pipeline was traditionally through Maya, Arnold Renderer, which that is not WebXR. That is
Right.
not going to cut it.
No.
And we get it to function, but then, you know, someone goes, oh, we have this one character. This is great. She's here. She's dancing. She's in WebAR. I can see her and she's beautiful. I'm like, great. Can you get 2? And the answer is no. You can't.
Exactly.
So knowing your limits.
Cause I know you've done some amazing worlds like that are you use. How do you approach a part? How do you think? What do you think about when, like, you were approached by Band Bob Studios to do the Baba Yaga? So how did that even come about? Like, what was your thought process going into that in terms of optimizing? And I noticed when I was in it, of course, the polygon count is quite low because you used a lot of flat surfaces there.
Yeah, what we did there was a few tricks of basically using two-dimensional object cutouts in a spatial sense to surround. So as you moved, you got a nice parallax effect of what felt like a deep forest, which was really just 2 or 3 layers of various cutouts. Things like that can be very helpful, but they can also be detrimental. You have to be careful about using too many overlapping transparencies. There's things, you know, honestly, transparencies and textures are worse than polygons when it comes to getting your optimization right, because, you know, if you keep your textures low and your you know, your draw calls and your transparencies on the, you know, lower side, you can have a ton of polygons and still get away with things. The geometry, I mean, there is a curve, an exponential curve. You get too high and it's going to be too much. You're talking millions. Chill out.
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah,
my objects are always like 1.5 million polygons, and I'm trying to reduce that always.
You need to learn a word called retopology.
Yes, I know.
Retopology.
Decimation.
Yeah, I've heard that
No.
one too. I've heard that one too.
Decimation and retopology are not the same thing.
No, you need both.
No.
Good to explain that one.
That's a whole other thing.
Do it.
But the way I approach things when I'm thinking about a design, I agree with Karam. Is there's a when you spawn in, like, you don't want to just be like, boop, here I am, here's everything. Right. You want some sort of reveal, and, you know, maybe that's a starting room that you go down a hallway, and like you said, you have the train doors open. Oh my God, there it is. But you need that in a way, and as you design, you want to think of ambient occlusion or I'm sorry, I'm losing. I don't know the word. Frustrum culling, if you will.
That one.
But being able to, you know, hide things that are rendering behind other things, you know. Right. So not having everything super out in the open. Actually, working on Burning Man and BRCVR, we had a huge problem with that, because building the open playa as big as it is, and you can see every single thing, we had to employ all kinds of things like level of detail aspects. You know, really that's it is, you know, employing level of detail and just making sure that everything on the playa was all created from one gigantic 8K texture atlas. Everything was one material, one texture, so it was almost one draw call. So
Kent is saying occlusion culling.
Occlusion culling. Thank you, Kent.
Thank you, Kent. Yes.
Oh my goodness, it just lost in the moment.
So talk to me, because I think as the designer or somebody who's either starting or in the mid into this stuff, and they want to hear, what do you guys think is the most important thought process you have to go through when you approach designing something for WebXR? What is the mind shift that has to happen, and what is your steps? If somebody can explain that, or if somebody has an example that they want to show or talk about, that'd be great.
The first thing that I have to consider is, how do I make this look amazing on the lowest possible device, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I also have to think about portrait mode versus like desktop mode versus VR mode, because we have a lot at our festivals and conferences. We have a lot of international guests and local guests, just family members who say, I only have a phone, can I still attend? I'm like, you sure can if it's not iOS. So then I have to think about, what is it going to feel like in portrait mode? Right. And what are they going to see at that size? And also, I've talked about this before, but people with low vision need like high contrast color, and you can't do sort of monochromatic muted pathways if you want people to be able to navigate it. Mm-hmm. So I think about the accessibility. I think about what is the lowest possible device that we're going to be targeting. I think about that the form factor and the shape and the orientation might be different, and does it work from all of those things? And whatever I can get away with there is what I'll get away with. I just did a really cool room that seemed to be working great, 16 meg download max, and like we're just in on time. And then James is like, yeah, the Quest 2, half of that stuff is probably not going to work. The Ready Player Me models are probably not going to do what you think they're going to do.
Yeah.
That shader's probably not going to come in. So it's like, okay, well, let's refactor for those things and assume that if those things don't populate on the phone, that it still looks cool. So it's this really top down, bottom up, back and
I was gonna
forth.
say it's almost not linear up and down. It's
Yeah, not at all.
matrixed, right?
I
You
go back
got-
to like Unreal and I'm like, oh, you mean I could just put whatever I want in here and just like check the poly counts and the optimization and we could do it? This
yeah.
is a whole different ball of wax. So I'll hand it over to you guys.
I think sometimes too it's a little bit of improvisation in this field because it's so new and there aren't a
Mhm.
lot of standards. A lot of it is just, does this work? Ooh,
Making
cool.
it up.
Does that work also? No. Uh-oh. You know.
There's
You have
a
to be a
lot of testing
tinkerer.
involved.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
I
have to
think
be a tinkerer, right? You have to be able to test and test
Absolutely.
and test and test and test.
in an early WebAR project, that was the same one we had to run through Houdini for all these characters. We actually had to run it through devices that I've never heard the names of before. They said, we want it on these devices, and I've never heard of them. They're smartphones to an extent, but they are not on the Google AR list. Like there's just the lowest of the low, and so that accessibility bar meant, okay, we really have to think clever about this. What are the libraries we can employ that will allow us to run this on the devices, and then test every single one. And we had to come back and say the bottom 5 on this list can't even run any web experience. But we tested it. We actually ran through a bunch of various levels of poly count, various levels of animation cycles, and learned pretty much what our bottom of the barrel is, and said at that point, we'll cut off and we'll set our established minimum requirement for an experience. Like what gives us the minimum that someone feels like they experience something cool? And then on top of that, we stack anything that's necessary for like the flagship phones, like iPhones and Samsungs. But knowing that barrier quite easily and having that available to test at all times makes it so much easier to plan for what you're going to have. Just the same thing with the Oculus Quest. Making all that stuff and then having it not work hurts you so much instead of going, I'm testing it and there it is.
And then you have to say like, but 90% of the people who are going to come to this show on VR are going to be on a Quest 2. So do you just optimize for that or not? But that's like a whole hypothetical, not about this panel.
Well, my thought is to go Quest first. I like to design for the lowest, like you said, Will, the lowest device. And in my space right now, in the VR space, that's the Quest. I'm shifting into WebXR, and oh boy, I get to think about portrait and landscape now. Thanks.
I saw your post about your, was it JSON?
3JS. I'm learning 3JS. I'm doing the thing. Come on, I'm doing it.
Yeah,
Get there. Anyway, I'm not there yet. That's for another day. But you're right. Design for the Quest, and then if you want to have a different experience for the PC, obviously as your different builds, you can, well, in Unity at least, you can build the different asset bundles. I'm not quite sure how that works with 3 yet, but still, like, the idea is that as long as it runs for the Quest, it's going to run for everybody, even on PC. Okay, if you come in and hey, it's a little low poly, you're still going to have a great smooth experience, versus let me try to get the shine on these bricks just right, and having it
But we're talking about things that still look really, really cool though, because you could design
Sure.
anything that'll work on anything, but how do you make it look super awesome? One thing that people may not know if they're coming to this, so I'm assuming the audience is both like people super, super advanced and people have no idea what we're talking about. One thing is that you learn is that shaders are actually cheaper than like Gifs sometimes, and like they can be cheaper than a lot of things, and you can do some wicked like water shaders and moving stuff and whatever, because it's the GPU just going, I get to eat candy now. So
explain for the people who don't know what you're talking about. What is a shader?
Well, shader is like a bit of code that will create effects using your graphics card more or less, and they can be like, they can cause like emergent effects. They can cause they can sort of, well, they can resemble all sorts of things, but they're basically programmatic visual patterns. Someone's going to crucify me.
No, it's fine. They change the pixels on the screen. You may have some poly in there, but you're changing the pixels on the screen to accommodate based off of a certain amount of code.
Right.
Yeah.
The
Shaders
basics
can affect geometry too, but a shader is really, at its base core, it's just the underlying programming or coding language that describes the material.
Yeah,
that's it.
Right.
So,
But they can do cool psychedelic things if you
They
know
can
how
do
to
anything.
play with
Yeah.
it.
It is literally code. It's a code base, and if you understand what you're doing with the code, you can. It's just math, you know.
Right.
How do you string it together?
It's
to
just
get it
like
to
in
do?
early WebXR days, a lot of people come in with all these like animated GIFs everywhere. There's like,
Mhm.
and you're like, yeah, man, everything will move. It's like GeoCities all over again. But it's
Right.
actually quite expensive to do that, and it can actually
Yes.
crunch you down. So just something to be aware of.
So just a tip for all you at home who want to know how to do animated GIFs in your textures. It's called a flipbook shader. It takes the UV and it flips it through a tile sprite sheet. So
I
there you
didn't
go.
know that. That's good to know.
Great tip, yeah.
Actually,
Yeah, imagine-
I'm learning as I mean, I love this. This is great
It's like
stuff,
telling a
guys.
system to look at an image and just scan through an image versus
Right.
here's a GIF that's a heavy set of images and just
Right.
play
And it's
each at the same
free,
time in
right.
order. And the CPU is going to be like, hold on a
Yeah.
second, I got to do this. Versus
It's
awesome.
just
Texture Atlas.
that's
So
honestly
if
what
you-
that is.
Yeah.
If you guys had to rank how to optimize for WebXR, an object or a scene, and those are two different things. I realize that, but if you had to rank the most important, where would you optimize first? What is the first thing
Textures.
you would look at?
Textures.
And then
Crushing textures.
crushing textures.
There's a cool Blender plugin that people that I know who design a lot for web don't even know about. It's called GLTF Bake, I think, and
Oh.
basically it just rewires the nodes for you so that it'll be correct for GLTF,
Oh.
and then it allows you to step through every texture associated, whether it's like a normal or whatever, and it'll just say, hey, by the way, this is 1024 or this is like 4K, and it was just hiding down there. And you might want to crush this down to 512, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, my scene is like 40 megabytes lighter, and it's coming in way faster. So simple tools like that can really do a lot of work that your brain may not sift through, and I recommend looking for them.
I have a point to
Awesome.
this. It's one thing you want to think about with your textures too is especially like on a VR headset, these things you're not looking through a 4K headset here, so you don't need ridiculous definition on your textures. You know, you can try to get away with as low of a texture as you can. If you look at it and it looks like garbage, all right, res it up twice and try again and keep doing that. And don't start with 4K and 8K textures because you're going to destroy it immediately. Start low and go high. And a lot of times on smaller things that don't the only time you really need a high definition texture is when you're looking at a full large piece of art or a large scale thing. Otherwise, if it's tiling along something or whatever, little metal bits and stuff, you can get away with crushing that down to 32, 64 sometimes.
Yeah, pick your battles.
Yeah.
It's find out what people are looking at and then focus on what that might be if necessary. I actually still have a lot of really good design channels about how every Nintendo game that's come out in the last 20 years still looks good. The moment you put it on an HD screen, yeah, you have pixelation because of the format of it, but all the textures look good. Water still looks good. And they chose occasionally a toon shader or a particular type of shader that allows them to make these very, very simple shapes into very complex looking things that will always look good because of the way that they're tiled. So that kind of system is really, really lightweight, and we can take a lot of notes from that so that it plays back properly. That's where I get a lot of notes.
Also,
Someone in the
Oren
chat
said draw calls.
Yeah, it's like
you want to
number 2 on
minimize
the
draw
list.
calls.
Definitely number 2.
Very cool.
Do you want to explain that, Cause, or do you want to just like jump ahead?
Yeah, sure. A draw call is basically every time the GPU has to draw something, and what you want to do is obviously minimize that. So by doing things like static batching, for example, you can have a lot of objects as long as they're all using the same material and the same texture. And this is where texture atlasing comes in. Put all of your textures as you can on one single atlas. Have that load once. Everything draws from it, and everything that is drawing from that one atlas gets batched into one in the final as a single draw call. So you can have like 40 objects, but it becomes one draw call. But if you change that material, if you do any little tweak to it and change it, even one material based on the same shader or anything, but it's using a different texture, or if you have different settings, it will immediately cause a different draw call. So that's definitely
it's the final step. You got to make sure it's the last
absolutely
thing.
Joining your meshes as much as possible, and doing all that.
Do you want to ask Will about edge computing yet? Because we only have like 5 minutes.
I wanted to talk about what's next, right? Because I love this space, and one of the reasons I love it as well is because I like to challenge myself, and I like to figure things out. I like to nudge around and like try things and stay up 3 days straight without sleep to try to figure something out. But that's not really a sustainable model for an industry, right? We're still in such early days where you guys are way more than I am, but you're figuring it out as you go along. But as time goes on, the industry will progress, and we won't need to do all these crazy optimizing things. So I was curious to hear about what's coming down the pike and how it's going to change what's happening now.
So I've got something that's considered in some cases like a light at the end of the tunnel, and in other cases I am totally blowing hot air, which is valid. But I'm working on a project behind closed doors that will release relatively soon, and it's coming up. People are talking about it. It's becoming a thing. I think Unreal or Epic came up with their own version of it called pixel streaming, which is essentially another word for edge compute. Especially in the AR sense, people really like that. VR is not ready at all because of just the way that we render both eyes. But for AR sense, if you're able to gather where someone's phone is using just really light SLAM tech of simultaneous localization and mapping, just phone knows where it is, doesn't see the room, doesn't transfer data back to some server telling you what your home looks like. If it just knows it's looking down, you can actually determine where the camera is and run it live in real time over a Wi-Fi network or even good 5G, 4G, and determine in an Unreal or Unity space that location, and it will stream on alpha the image back to your phone in real time at a frame rate that is acceptable. Before, we didn't have that. But considering how popular Stadia and other elements from Google are becoming, or at least the concept of it is becoming, we're starting to see a lot of tests come out for these soon, and there will be soon some projects that will run cloud-based that are essentially edge, where you can go to a website and you have WebXR that has no particular limits, has really good reflections, has really good lighting, and these polygon limits kind of disappear a little bit. I am saying that with a massive handful of salt, is that there's a lot of requirements to make these things happen, a lot of server infrastructure, a lot of costs that is very prohibitive to any independent creator of any kind. And so I'm like, a light at the end of the tunnel for only some, and then it'll be a while before I think that opens up. But there's a lot of opportunity
the idea of like
there.
Stadia style streaming WebXR for people too. You know,
yes.
Xbox's Game Pass is like crushing it right now, playing AAA games on my phone in real time. What Stadia didn't achieve, they're just like, yeah, $14 a month. So I ask myself, like, what if we could go totally crazy? Is it still WebXR at that point? I don't know, whatever. But still, there's something to that.
Karen, did you have something you wanted to show? I didn't mean to cut you off, Cause. I'm sorry. Did you have something you wanted to say?
If you have time for it, I have like a minute and 20-second reel of some of the spaces I built that are somewhere between Mozilla hubs and the Janus engine, and just shows you some of the examples of like non-orthogonal spaces where I've crunched down stuff, try to make it look cinematic. I'm a big Terry Gilliam fan, so there's a lot of that going on there. But you can play that whenever you feel like.
I think go ahead, Ben. Ben, are you listening? Ben, can you play?
That would be awesome. Give us the best of the best.
I think I would love to have all of you. I would honestly love to show all of your work because I think all of you are amazing. But I love Karam has his video, so let's talk through.
This is just like some of my journey of some of the spaces I built in the last year, just exploring what I can get away with. And
Cause has one too. Go ahead, Ben. Ben, can you roll Karam's video? I think we should absolutely list some of the other spaces out there that these guys, all of you are doing, because you guys are on the forefront of doing amazing work.
One of the things I'm working on right now is a website, actually collect all of the things I'm doing in one spot where people can actually find it. It's not ready yet, so.
Nice to see you.
Hey, hey everybody, what's happening?
I know these people.
Hi, everybody.
Story.
Guys, I want to say thank you so much. It was such an engaging conversation.
Let me just do a quick bump at the end of this. The 5 Hours Festival starts October 22nd online, where you can actually go
I'll
inside of
be
our
there.
WebXR world. So
Nice.
please do check it out, 5hours.net. We love you. Thank you so much.
Will do. Thank you so much,
Cool.
guys.
Thank you. That was
Take
awesome.
care.
All right.
See you, friends.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.